Hello everyone and welcome to the SAP Deployment Automation Framework demo. Before we get started, I want to go ahead and draw your attention to our repository. We recently moved our repository, so you'll find the new address at github.com/azure/SAP automation. And here, of course, you will find all of our documentation. You will find our code, of course, as well as our contributing guidelines. So go ahead and take a look through here and look through the different pieces of the code that we'll be deploying. Also recently published is our SAP Deployment Automation Framework on Azure Docs page. So here you'll find a little bit more of a deeper dive into our automation. You'll find information on the tools that we use, as well as the different steps that we'll be taking in our automation demo today. So please go ahead and go to the link and make sure you check through the documentation as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get to the demo. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our Azure portal. We're going to click on our Cloud Shell here in the upper right, and we should see a Cloud Shell open. So we should do, first and foremost, AZ login. We're going to get instructions on screen for how to authenticate. You'll go to a URL, you'll enter the code that's displayed, and you should be able to authenticate to your tenant. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to create an SPN, and you're going to assign it User Access Administrator. So you can easily use these two commands in order to do that. And the reason I'm not doing this on screen is because these commands do output some sensitive information about your subscription and your tenant. But you do want to collect the output from this first command and make sure you also run the second command, which is the SPN app ID. You can also create an SPN according to whatever process that your organization specifies. Make sure that you collect the app ID, the password or the secret, and the tenant ID that is output from the first command. So I've already done that piece as well. I simply copy and pasted those commands into my Cloud Shell. So I've already done that piece. I've already run these commands in my Cloud Shell. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to make a directory. This is going to be our root directory where we hold our repository and configuration files. We're going to go into that directory and we're going to do git clone. In order to clone our repository, we're going to go into the repository folder. And I'm going to check out a particular branch. Different branches may have different features, and you're going to want to verify which branch that you'll be using for your deployment. I'm just going to check out a specific branch for demo purposes, and I'll clear the screen. We want to export a couple of variables for our Bash Cloud Shell session. So deployment repo path is the path to our SAP HANA repo. And we want to export ARM subscription ID, which is our subscription ID. These will be used by the automation. And if we go back one step, go back to the folder above SAP HANA, we want to go ahead and clone the workspaces folder from the SAP HANA directory. So as you can see in this branch, the path to the workspaces folder in the repository can be seen here. Again, for your specific branch, you're going to want to find the path, which should be similar to the path that you see here, but can be different in a few parent folders. And so if we do an ls and verify our workspaces folder is there, we can see that we have our configuration files. Why do we do this? We do this because we don't want to change any files within the SAP HANA repository after you clone it. If you do update your SAP HANA repository via Git pull, then your changes may be overridden or you may have conflicts. So your configuration files, which will eventually represent your environment, should be cloned out of the SAP HANA repository. And that's why we have that sample workspaces directory for you to copy out of the repository. So this workspaces folder is going to contain a lot of different deployments for a lot of different regions. Let's just go into there. We have different folders for different phases of our deployment. For the management plane, we will be deploying the deployer and the library. So let's go into our deployer and take a look at what's in there. And we can see in this branch, we do have several different regions represented. We're going to be deploying to UK South. Let's go into that folder so we can take a look at what's in there. We see we have our TF-vars file. If we go ahead and hit code space period, we actually can open a VS Code editor and take a look at what's in here. Depending on different options that you want to deploy, whether you already have a virtual network, whether you already have a particular address space you want to use, we can choose a type of deployer VM, the image, the authentication type, as well as many other things. So you're going to want to go ahead and edit these variables prior to deploying in order to suit your environment. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. So before we begin our deployment, I've edited my files and I'm ready to start deploying. But if you want to go to the repository under Documentation, SAP Automation on Azure, Process Documentation, and click on the MD file for the Cloud Shell, you can follow along with the commands that I'm going to deploy. So I'm going to run the prepare region.sh script, again, according to the instructions in the repository. If we scroll down and prepare the region, I'm going to be running actually the long form of the command right here. And as you can see, there are some secrets and subscription information. So I will copy and paste the command into my Cloud Shell, but I'll restart the video after the command is no longer visible. An important tip here is you want to make sure you include the auto approve so that you have no manual input as part of this command. The prepare region orchestration will go through a few rounds of Terraform initializing, Terraform planning, and Terraform applying, as it deploys not only the deployer resource group, the library resource group, refreshes the states, uploads the states to the storage account, and refreshes the states again. So make sure that if you want the full automation experience, you include auto approve. So I'll go back to my Cloud Shell, and I actually, very important, will go back to my workspaces folder. From the workspaces folder, then we can run our command. So that's what I'll do now. As we can see, I just run the command and we are commencing with the deployment. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes to deploy both the deployer resource group and the library resource group. So I will come back after the deployment is complete. Here we are after the deployment of the management plane is complete. I'll maximize the resource group box so you can see that we do have our deployer VM. We do have a public IP for demo purposes so that we can connect. We do have a key vault in which we can find the secrets to the deployer VM, as well as our subscription ID, tenant ID, and other things that will need to be passed down to other phases of the deployment. We also have our MSI, which will have access to the key vaults and secrets in the deployment. We have our library resource group as well, in which we have our SAP library storage account, as well as our state file storage account. And if we open our state file storage account and we go to the TF state container, we can see we've uploaded our Terraform state files for both the deployer resource group as well as the library resource group. So the next thing we want to do is log on to our deployer VM to complete the infrastructure deployment. So now we're going to log on to our deployer VM. What you'll see is a copy of the Azure SAP Automated Deployment folder, as well as an SAP HANA repository that has been cloned into that folder. It's important to go into the SAP HANA repository and again check out your appropriate branch. You can then transfer your workspaces folder from your execution environment, whether it be Cloud Shell, PowerShell, etc., onto the deployer VM, again into the same folder, so that you have a file structure like this. So ensure that you have your workspaces folder outside of your HANA repository in the Azure SAP Automated Deployment folder. In order to deploy the workload zone, we have to go into the workspaces folder, into the landscape folder, and into the folder in which the TF vars file lies. So I'm going to go dev UK South, and I'm going to go into this folder here. The reason why we have to go into our environmental folder for the rest of the deployments is because the workload zone is the first opportunity that you will have to divide your deployment up into environments. So the prepare region script kind of deployed a management zone, which is installed regardless of environments, because you use the management zone to deploy to dev, QA, test, prod, whatever environments that you have. So now that we're going to be deploying our environment specific resources, we do have to go into the landscape phase folder and into our environment folder. So we have our install workload zone command here. And we want to pass in quite a few parameters so that the command knows where to look for the management resources, including the management state file. We want to pass in our storage account, our subscription and SPN information, etc. But again, this command does contain SPN secrets, so I won't be showing the actual command that I'm running. Just know that this is the form of the command and the parameters that are passed through it. And of course, also include auto approve so that we don't have any prompts from Terraform. So I'll go ahead and copy my version of the command and run it on the deployer VM. As we can see, we have our workload zone deploying. Again, we're going to go through our Terraform initialize, plan, and apply commands, and then I'll come back and show you what's deployed after this command completes. All right, so I was able to deploy our landscape, and this is going to be similar to what your output will look like. So we'll see our landscape module deploying, and then at the end of that, we'll see our output. This one's a little shorter, but yours might be a little bit longer. All in all, it takes about 10 minutes or so to deploy. So we've output everything that we've deployed, and let's take a look at what that looks like. We have an additional resource group after deploying the landscape. And then inside that resource group, we have our networking infrastructure, our NSGs, route tables, our virtual network. And optionally, we've deployed an Azure NetApp file pool. as well as a key vault that will hold all of our secrets for the VMs that we're going to deploy in the next phase. So we'll go back to our deployer VM and we'll begin deploying our SAP VMs. So I'll clear that output. And again, because we're deploying a particular environment, not only will we go into our system folder, but we'll go into the particular environment that we'll be deploying. And we should see our TFVARS file for our system, just to cat that out so we can take a peek at it. So we take a look at the file, again, very similar to the deployer VM TFVARS file, as well as the landscape TFVARS file, and the library TFVARS file. Again, different options if we have existing infrastructure, different options for our images for our back end, different options for high availability for all of our tiers. We can specify our database nodes as well as the IPs and things like that. There's a lot we can customize here, and it's probably the most important TFVARS file that we have to customize. So make sure you go in here and you take a look at all of the options and make sure they're set according to what you need. I'm going to get all of this off the screen. And so the last command we're going to run is one that I'll actually be able to show you. It's actually pretty simple. And that is our installer.sh command. As you can see, the command is getting started. I'll come back once the command has completed and all of the systems have been deployed. Okay, so we've done our system deployment, and so we'll go to our resource group and take a look at what that entails. So we'll come out of our landscape zone deployment and we'll have yet another resource group, and I'll sort by type. So we have some application security groups. We have all of our mini disks. We have our load balancers for the central servers and the database servers. We have our proximity placement groups for each zone, zone 1 and zone 2. And as you can see, we have our virtual machines. We've done our deployments so that each tier consists of 2 VM deployed to a different zone. So for example, the app tier has an app VM in zone 1, as we can see here. And then the second app machine is deployed in zone 2. And the same is true for the other sets of servers as well. Now that we've deployed all of our infrastructure, we can move on to the software deployment, and that piece will be next. Here we are back on the deployer VM, and we're ready to download and upload our SAP binaries now that we have the infrastructure deployed. So from our workspaces folder, we can go to our bill of materials folder, and we'll see we'll have one YAML file. If we cat that out, we see we have information about our BOM base name, the location of our storage account, as well as the container it should go in, and our deployer resource group key vault name. We want to make sure all of this information is correct before continuing with the BOM process. So we'll go ahead and clear this out. Validator test menu is the script. The path of that script may be a little bit different depending on what branch you're in. So as we can see, we have the 3 options. Other than quit, we have BOM downloader, which will download the software from SAP onto the deployer VM, and then BOM uploader, which will upload the BOM from the deployer VM to the storage account. This process takes about 70 to 90 minutes, which is why we won't do it during the demo. But we can go to the storage account and show you the end result of this process. we go to our library resource group, our live storage account, containers, SAP bits, we can see that we've already done this and our SAP files are here. So we can go back to our deployer VM. One thing I want to mention is before we go through the process of downloading and uploading the BOM, before we call that menu, we have to make sure to set our S account username and password in the deployer resource group key vault. So your S account is your account from SAP that has permissions to download the SAP software. Make sure your account has permissions to do this. You can run each of these commands in the deployer VM prior to calling validator test menu. So now we have our BOM and we're ready to actually start installing. Let's go to our system folder. We see that a few other files have popped up. These files were created after we deployed our system infrastructure. We have a host file, which contain information about how to reach each of the hosts, as well as username and connection information. Let's clear up the screen. You'll also see we have SAP parameters. And SAP parameters contains information about the SID we chose, our key vault name, our platform, information about high availability, as well as our load balancer IPs. We also see that our disk information is here. And this is the information that's going to get fed into the automation. We can begin the process of installing our SAP software. So we're going to go to the location where Ansible scripts are held again. Again, this may be different for your branch. And we're going to call the test menu.sh command. As you can see, we have several options that will automate the install of the software for us. The first few options ensure that all of the packages, repositories, accounts, etc. are set up on the SAP machines prior to beginning the SAP install. We have HANA database install, as well as central services installation. We have our DB load option. This option takes about 30 minutes or so, just so you know. Our PaaS and app install, our web dispatcher install. We don't have one in this installation for this demo, but if we did have one, we could call this option. HSR setup for our scale out scenarios, as well as our pacemaker options. We're going to be integrating the BOM upload and download into this menu as well. But for now, please call the previous validator menu script. We also have the option to install in groups some of the installation options, as well as running all playbooks. Let's start with option 1. As we can see, the Ansible automation will start with the base OS config, and we'll just come back at the end when we're ready to go with option 2. So step 1 for the base OS config has completed, and I'll take you down rather quickly, but we've done things such as install all of our packages. We're using SUSE 15.2 just for your reference. We perform the operations on the swap file, host name, all of our repos, and if we scroll down, a little bit more quickly here, we can see that our logical volume creation has completed. If we scroll a little bit more, I won't go through every single detail because there's a lot here with file systems and things like that, but also our necessary accounts are created, our packages are installed, our file system is created, and we're ready to do the SAP OS specific setup, as well as ensure the necessary accounts. So when you're all done, you should get output similar to this, where we have 0 failed or 0 unreachable, and you should see the output of the tasks that were performed. So we're going to go back to our menu. We're going to run playbook 2, and I'll come back to you once it's completed, but I'll start it here for you. And we're back. Option 2 is completed. We've performed some SAP specific configurations, such as creating our SAP groups and users, creating our SAP directory. So let's move on to option 3, BOM processing. Just going to keep moving right along here. And once again, I'll just cut ahead to the end and ensure that everything completed successfully, and we'll be back. And we're back. We've completed the BOM processing step. And what this step actually did is it downloaded the SAP software from the library storage account onto the central services servers. So we can see at the end here, again, we have a summary of what was done at the end. So we can see we completed successfully, no unreachable, no. So now we're going to go ahead and run the HANADB install, which is step 4. And I'll go ahead and just let it start running, and then we'll come back once it's completed. And we're back. Task 4 is completed successfully. We can see a summary of what was completed. Most important, we were able to execute the HANA database LCM command on the database machines. So we're going to go ahead and look at our menu here, and what's next is our central services install. So we'll go ahead and do that. Hit option 5 and hit enter, and we're going to go ahead and let this run, and once again come back. And we're back. As you can see, we've completed the central services installation. We've completed step 5 successfully, and we again have our summary here at the bottom. So our next step is to go back to the menu and run task 6, which is DB load. This does take 30 minutes, so just like everything else, I'll go ahead and start the DB load task and come back. All right, and so we're back. We've completed the DB load. As we can see, we've completed after about 30 minutes or so. So we're going to go back to our menu, and then we're going to do the PAS installation step. And we're off, and I'll go ahead and come back once this is completed. All right, so we've completed our PAS install. As you can see, again, we have a summary and we were successful. We're going to come back to our menu, and we're going to run the app install, which is option 8, and that will complete our SAP HANA install for this setup. So let's go ahead and run that. And I'll go ahead and come back once it's completed. All right, everyone, and we're back. So after a few minutes, we have run the app install portion of the installation. Let's go ahead and verify the installation on our servers. We want to check the process list on each tier of server so that we can ensure that all of the processes are running green. So if we take a look at our same directory we've been working with, still on our deployer VM, we still have our host file. And we can see each tier as well as the connection information. I'm going to go ahead and connect to one of the HANA database VMs. But before I do, I want to show you that the SSH key has been pulled from the key vault and put into the directory as part of our software deployment so that we can easily use it to connect to our machines. And we can see our user from the host file as well. We're logged on to one of the HANA database VMs, and we are going to elevate. And then we're just going to check our processes to ensure everything's running. And as we can see, everything's running green, which is exactly what we want to see. So let me exit out of this machine. Clear my screen so there's no confusion. And the next machine we're going to go in, we're going to check one of our SCS instances. So I'm actually going to cat out our host file to get that other IP address. We're just going to do this instance here. And we're logged in, and we're going to elevate. And same command. And as we can see, we have our processes running green. So let me exit out of here. So now I'm going to go ahead and check our PAS instance. So I'll cat out the host file. Once again. And now I'm going to grab our IP address. Very similar commands, and check our processes. And as you can see, we're running green. All right, so quick overview of what we've done today. We were able to pull down our HANA repository from GitHub. We were able to use it to deploy our deployer environment, and we were able to store SAP bits in a storage account as well as our state files. We were able to log on to our deployer VM and deploy our infrastructure for our SAP system VMs, as well as the SAP system VMs. And we were able to use the deployer to also install our HANA system. All in all, this means that with careful planning, you can have a SAP HANA system up and running in less than a day. Even with all of the deployment times for some of the pieces, such as downloading the binaries to deploy your VM and uploading them to the storage account, and some of the longer running commands such as db load, we were able to get our SAP HANA system installed and ready for work. I hope you enjoyed this demo, and please ask any questions if you have them.